And we're live. Welcome back, everyone out there. My name is Hamid Alizadeh.
And we're live. Welcome back.
As you can see, we still haven't mastered the craft of podcasting yet. But yes, my name is Hamid Alizadeh. I'm here with Jorge Martin. We are from the International Secretariat of the Revolutionary Communists International. And we are launching this new podcast where we discuss world events and news on a weekly basis, analyzing the general process of the crisis of capitalism, of the class struggle, and the position of communists towards this. As you might have also noticed, our podcast has finally gotten itself a name, Against the Stream. We are very thankful for all the dozens and dozens of very good suggestions, and frankly, some of them not so good suggestions that were made to us of podcast names. But we came down with the winner, Against the Stream. I think is a good one. It describes what we're trying to do and what the show is about. We are also setting up accounts on Spotify, Apple Podcasts. We have set up a dedicated YouTube channel, and more channels will follow in the next period. But if you can, do subscribe to all of these accounts whenever you get the chance. Would also like to thank very much for all the feedback that we received. This has been very, very useful to calibrate the way that we do the show. And we appreciate if you continue with that. So please send us any feedback that you have. You can post it in the comments to this to the show on YouTube, or you can send it to our emails on marxist.com. Also, please send any questions that you have you would like us to deal with, either during the show or afterwards, again in the comments, as well as articles that you think would be helpful for us to bring up in future shows. Now, having said that, Jorge, let's go straight into the topics that we've prepared. The first topic that we have is on Spain. We don't have an article as we usually have, but I know you've been looking into this.
It has been in the news for the last 2 days. Mm-hmm. There's been flash floods mainly in the Valencia region of Spain, but also in a few other places. This is an ongoing story. We were just reading just before coming live that the number of people who have been killed has been updated to 140. So this makes it probably the worst example of flash floods in Spain, or the most deadly case for many decades now. And obviously, you might think, well, this is a freak, random weather occurrence, but which it is. But it also has a number of things that we should be talking about as communists, because they are related. And well, first of all, just to explain what happened, there is this weather phenomena, which is now known as a DANA, which is a Spanish acronym for High Altitude Isolated Depression. It used to be called a different name. In Spain, it used to be known as La Gota Fría, the cold drop.
Yeah.
And what it basically means is that an area of a high altitude depression, cold weather, gets detached from the northern jet stream, and it gets isolated at a very high altitude, about 10 kilometers high in the atmosphere. And then when this area of cold weather is hit by the upcoming warm weather from the Mediterranean, which is very humid, contains a lot of moisture, when these two phenomena collide, then there is a sudden storm with a lot of water being released at the same time. And these kind of storms are self-feeding, and they stay more or less static in one point for a period of time. So what's happened? This happened on Tuesday. Actually, there was prior warning for this. In fact, I was just reading an article that was published in The Guardian about weather systems. On Monday, there was warning about this. And this DANA, this particular DANA or cold drop, developed on Tuesday. mainly in Valencia, but also in other parts of Spain. And what you had was the sudden storm where the total amount of water that will fall in 1 year was concentrated in maybe 12 hours or 24 hours. In one particular case, in one of the towns most badly affected, I think they reached 420 liters per square meter in the course of 24 hours. And this is about 3 times the annual rainfall for that particular town.
Yeah.
So what happened was that upstream, this was happening. The water was coming down whichever way it could, mainly through the town's streets, and then through creeks and parts of the geography, and then going into the main rivers, and the rivers were becoming overflown.
Yeah.
And this is what caused the death of many people, because this was sudden. The river levels rose very quickly, and many people couldn't escape. This is the part where this is a natural disaster, a weather occurrence. But the thing is that, one, this type of weather phenomena are very common in this region of Spain, in the eastern, in Catalonia, in Valencia, at this time of the year, September, October, which is when this depression, these cold weather systems get detached from the northern, from the jet stream, but also it's when the very hot Mediterranean Sea, which has been warming up during the summer, releases this moisture into the atmosphere. And although it's not possible to predict exactly where it's going to hit, there was a general warning for the region. Yeah. And then as the day started, the warning became more precise. And here we have, at the very least, 3 different things that need to be said. The first one is that this region, Valencia, has a right-wing government of the Popular Party that came to power about a year ago, approximately. And this government, one of the first measures they introduced was they abolished a unit that had been created, which is called the Emergency Managing Unit for Valencia. And this emergency managing unit is precisely for situations like this, to coordinate the relief efforts, forewarn people about what's going to happen, and be ready and prepared for eventualities. They decided to do away with this. They said it was a wasteful expenditure. As part of the general program of cuts and austerity, they abolished this unit with all the costs involved, and this has now had a direct impact on this question. 140 people have been killed
because as far as I could see, lots of people are still missing. And according to The Guardian that I was reading just before the show, they are arriving on the scene with 50 mobile morgues.
Yes.
So
there are thousands of cars stranded. Many people were caught in the cars coming back from work and so on. There are many people, many places the rescue teams haven't even reached. There's tens of thousands of people without electricity supply. The whole region is cut off from train access and so on. It's a big disaster. Now, as I said, there was irresponsibility in the part of the regional government, but not only in abolishing, because of austerity cuts, the emergency coordination unit, but also the regional government did not send out warnings to people in a timely manner. There is a system now in Spain, which exists in many other countries, where people can receive warnings in the mobile phones, according to their location. And so by 1 o'clock, i.e. by midday, the most affected towns had already received 300, 400 liters of water per square meter. The rivers were overflown. And obviously what's going to happen inevitably is that further downstream, i.e. going into Valencia capital, which is by the sea, this is going to hit them 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 hours later when the water starts to come down. And everyone knew that this was going to happen. But at lunchtime, the regional government came out on the news saying that the storm was easing off, that the danger was passing. And not only this, but then they didn't send any warning to people up until 8 p.m. when most people were already trapped by the waters, trapped by mudslides and so on. This also prevented another thing that many people have been commenting, and which I think is very relevant, which is that many people were either at work or coming back from work, and they didn't receive any warning. So
no text, no radio, emergency
nothing.
calls.
So in fact, people who should have maybe stayed at their workplace instead of taking the car and being caught by the growing rivers, overflowing rivers, they should have stayed at their workplace. It would be safer. Or people who shouldn't have gone to work on that day, because for the whole day there was a red weather alert. A red weather alert means that something very big might happen. Not that definitely is going to happen, but might happen. And in situations like this, what you should do is you should close down all workplaces, all non-essential workplaces, tell children to stay at home, close down schools, and so on. So in order to prevent people from moving from one place to another, people should go into higher ground, away from dry riverbeds, and so on. So in reality, this was not done. Why wasn't it done? Because this way is cheaper. Because profits, corporate profits of companies, come before saving people's lives.
I mean, we've seen this in the US also lately, and also in the later years, with the underfunding of FEMA, with the lack of flood protection services and infrastructure that's not been updated for decades.
But there were very striking cases that people highlighted on social media. It's now gone into the news in Spain. Like, for instance, there's this big supermarket chain, one of the biggest supermarket chains in Spain, called Mercadona, owned by one businessman called Juan Roch. And he said they sent out the delivery vans for online shopping, home delivery. They sent them out, despite the fact there was a red weather alert. And by the time that many of them were going out, it was already the rivers were overflowing and so on. So there are some images of one such van. It's in the middle of a sea of water, trying to the emergency services in a helicopter trying to rescue the driver. And there are many really callous examples of this, of how businessmen, capitalists put the profits before the interest of saving people's lives. And many people died directly because of this.
We had that also, I think, was it last year or the year before? There was an Amazon warehouse in the US where the workers were told to work right up until the last moment, where the whole thing was ravaged by
the storm.
And it shows, they talk about, on the one hand, you see there's cuts on all of these services. There's a lack of focus on infrastructure, on alert systems, or whatever they have. They push workers to go to work and so on and so forth in order to protect their profits. On the other hand, they have no problem sending millions, billions of dollars to Ukraine, to the Middle East, to wage wars, and then they say, oh, they do that in order to protect our European and Western civilization and Western society.
There's another angle to this.
And our values.
There's another angle to this, which is the fact that this type of storms, these Dana storms, become more likely with climate change. i.e., as the Mediterranean gets warmer every year, I think in the last 2 years have been particularly warm, maybe 3-4 degrees of the sea temperature higher than average. Then obviously they release more moisture. The warm column of warm humid air is stronger, and this weather phenomena get more. They now have a name for it, because hurricanes are not supposed to happen in the Mediterranean. But they now develop this new term called a Medicane, which is a Mediterranean hurricane, i.e. like tropical storms in the Mediterranean where they're not supposed to happen, but they're now becoming more common. And now we're talking about 250 people killed in Spain, at least 240 people, latest figures. But earlier in September, there was a big Medicane, which affected Greece. Then it moved down to Libya, and thousands of people were killed. So this kind of extreme weather phenomena becoming more prevalent because of climate change.
In fact, I was thinking before the show that we've been talking a lot recently about the question of nuclear war, that the bourgeois are kind of hiding the idea of a nuclear war and what threat it actually poses to humanity. In the Cold War period, there was a lot of awareness about this, you can say. But the fact that the capitalist class in the long term can drag humanity, has created these destructive weapons that could drag humanity into barbarism or even destroy humanity. But obviously, with the nuclear war, there's always a deterrent factor, in the sense that all of the different capitalist nations, imperialist nations, are pointing nuclear warheads at each other, and they know if any one of them presses the button, they'll all be destroyed. But you have, in a sense, what's happening to the environment today, a slide towards a gradual slide towards the destruction of the planet. I mean, one thing is these weather formations and extreme weather events, which are becoming more and more frequent and more intense all over the world. You have the drying up of lakes, hundreds of lakes. I read somewhere that in the last 10 years, 200 lakes only in the US have dried up. All over the world, the biggest lakes, huge lake areas, are drying up, with catastrophic impact on the surrounding environment, on people's livelihoods. You have the change in the temperature of the oceans, with the with wildlife being threatened by it. You have in Britain, we have the water systems, the canals, the rivers being totally polluted by waste, and here there's no deterrent for the bourgeois. There's unless they're stopped, because each one of them says, well, yeah, we should do something for the environment, but I don't want to pay for it. Let the other guys do it. I'm just going to do my own thing here. But there's no, because this is such an anarchic system, there's no common idea of actually doing a serious attempt of changing this.
There is another factor that is involved in all of this, obviously, which is that when there is torrential rains, the water comes down riverbeds that usually are dry, right? So what happens is that throughout the coast, all the way from Catalonia down to Valencia and other areas, is that because these riverbeds, they're usually dry for many years. They can go dry for many years, and then once in a while there's a big storm, and then they come down, right? Yeah. Full of water. So in some cases, local councils have given permission for building in these places, building maybe a camping, tourist installation, or tarmacking it, making it into a car park or onto a road sometimes. And this is completely irresponsible. And for many years, maybe nothing happens, but then all of a sudden something happens, and then this is a built area, is an area where cars are parked, or where people are sleeping in the tents, and then a major disaster happens. But you were saying something about capitalism and the logic of capitalism. I saw a number of tweets online from different left organizations, and one was saying, for instance, we need to change the productive model, i.e. we shouldn't be we need to go for degrowth or this and that. And I'm thinking, it's not the productive model, is the system, is the capitalist system. It's not like they're implying that you can have maybe a type of capitalism that's a bit more regulated, a bit nicer to the environment. But no, this is inbuilt in the DNA of capitalism. It's precisely maximization of profit in the short term for a few private individuals. And this is directly in contradiction with saving the planet, with protecting human life. And this is not an evil aspect of capitalism. Is capitalism itself is built that way for the maximization of profit.
In fact, I would say the destruction of the planet has come to such an extent that in order to save it, you don't need degrowth. You need to use all of the productive capacity of humanity in a rational way. In order to change things up, reforestation, the suction of CO2 out of the thing, the cleaning of the riverbeds, and so on and so forth.
One comrade commented, capitalism kills, when I was talking about workers being forced to go to work or to come back in the middle of the storm. And I said, capitalism kills. That's why we need to kill capitalism before it destroys the planet.
Yes. Very well. We'll continue to monitor this situation, and it will be interesting to see the political impact it's going to have in Spain. But we're going to move on now to the next item on our agenda, which is on the question of Israel and the war in the Middle East, the conflict between Israel and Iran in particular. And last week, I believe, there was a retaliation strike after the Iranians bombed through a missile, how do you say, a series of missiles against Israel. The Israelis did not reply or did not retaliate for a number of weeks. But then finally, last week, we had this retaliation. And we have an article here by Washington Post. It's called Military Briefing, Where Israel Struck Iran. This is from today. And I'm just going to read out a couple of paragraphs here. I'm just going to skip a bit. But it says, Israel has said that if needed, it will attack directly again. I.e., they just had this attack, but they might attack again. A former senior official in Israel's Mossad intelligence agency and the defense ministry said, a psychological barrier was broken this weekend. I want to get back to that in a minute. It says, if Iran continues to push it and retaliates once more, I don't know where Iran will end up.
Who's saying that?
This is a Mossad intelligence agent, basically, or an official from Mossad. And then he goes on to explain what actually happened, that 100 Israeli aircraft took part in this operation, and which was prepared for weeks. Then there's a U.S. defense official says this was a very complex and serious operation. And they talk about how they went through Syria and there were F-35 stealth fighters who were hitting Iranian and Syrian defenses and so on. Basically making out that this was a very, very big and complex and impressive event. And then they say this, they say the targets, according to a person familiar with the operation and other media reports, included Iranian air defenses, especially around Tehran, and those protecting energy facilities in the provinces of Elam and Khuzestan. And then further down it says, in addition, Israel also struck military bases such as Parchin and Khojir, which housed missile production sites, including sophisticated planetary mixers used to produce solid fuel for long-range missiles, as well as a drone factory, according to satellite imagery and people with knowledge of the Israeli operation. Now, what's interesting here is that this was the Iranian attack on Israel was unprecedented in the sense that Israel has carried out quite a few attacks, covert or overtly covert, i.e. sabotage missions and assassinations and so on in Iran for the past many years.
But also open aerial strikes.
Aerial strikes. And this time you had, for the first time, a major country, not an organization, so to say, like Hamas or Hezbollah, a major country in recent times carrying out an open attack, military attack on Israel, with hundreds of 200 ballistic missiles, many of them, dozens of which actually landed. And the response, which was supposed to be this very impressive, and they build it up like this was a huge thing, this was a huge achievement, does not seem that much. It's a couple of air defense batteries and a couple of a drone production facility and some missile fuel factory. And I'm sure that the Iranians have many of these spread all over the country. Iran is a huge country. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't that big a thing. Now, obviously, the question comes: why is that?
And on top of this, it seems that the Iranians gave advance warning. They say they gave advance warning to the U.S. and someone else, Europe, perhaps.
Yes.
But obviously, Europe and the U.S. then passed on the message to the Iranians. So it wasn't like a big surprise or a devastating blow as Netanyahu had promised.
Exactly. They were making a big hoo-ha. This was going to be a big thing. But in reality, there was not much damage done. And I would say that what this represents is that, yes, as he says, that there is a psychological barrier that has been, there's several psychological barriers which have been crossed. One is that the two major military powers in this region have attacked one another openly. That's something you can't push back into the box. Mm-hmm. But the other thing is also that for the first time, I think, Iran's military capabilities were shown in practice, and uh, and they were shown to be extremely powerful. The Israeli defenses, there was all these ideas about David's sling and
Arrow, the arrow
there was
system,
an arrow system. They have 3 or 4 layers of
the Iron
missile,
Dome,
Iron Dome, David's
David's
sling,
the arrow system.
and the arrow system. And they didn't do the job. Israel portrayed itself, the Israeli state portrayed itself to the world as well as to its own population as this mighty, unpregnable defender of Israel, and nothing could harm it. It had this extremely advanced military, and yet it was shown up by this supposedly far more inferior power, Iran. I noted that, I think many people noted that in the days before this attack, there was a big leak coming from somewhere very high up in the US of the plans of Israel to attack Iran, which were scuppered, we can only suppose, by this by this leak, which means that there are certain layers or certain factions, at least in Washington, which were opposed to this and wanted to stop an escalation. I don't know how much of an effect it had, but basically, in my opinion, what comes out of this is that the changing balance of forces in the Middle East has been proven to everyone. That Iran is now the most powerful military force in the region in terms of influence, in terms of manpower. It has militias that it supports in Lebanon, in Syria, in Iraq, in Yemen. It has very advanced capabilities.
In Yemen, these militias are in power.
Yes, and in Lebanon, they're de facto in power. In Iraq, they're de facto in power. Syria is their ally. They have advanced drone capabilities. They have advanced missile capabilities, they support Hamas even, in the small scale, but also in the large scale in terms of, larger scale missile production. And they have and they can't be shut down as easily as one might think. And the Israelis, we can note that they didn't attack the oil installations. They didn't attack the nuclear program. Why?
They didn't attack high-profile officials
Precisely,
or anything like this.
Precisely. Although I'm sure that Netanyahu would have wanted that. And you see, the way I see it, this goes back to what is the fundamental basis of this conflict. The process that's running it is the relative decline of the U.S. The U.S. imperialism having reached its limits in Iraq and Afghanistan, been defeated. They can't put boots on the ground anymore. In Syria, they were defeated. They can't engage in these never-ending wars. There's a massive opposition to these wars in the U.S. itself. Militarily, they've been shown up. In Ukraine, they're being shown up for militarily. And after the destruction of the Iraqi state by the US and Britain and other European powers, essentially, Iran came on top as the most powerful military force and political force in the region. Now,
and on top of this, if I can say something, the relative decline of the U.S. military power or U.S. power in the region has been filled by 2 other powers, Russia, not only Iran. Not only has led to the strengthening of Iran, but behind that we see the strengthening of Russia, which really determined the outcome of the Syrian civil war to its own advantage, but also of China, which is now the main trading partner of the Gulf states, the main purchaser of energy and oil from the region, and brokered the peace deal between Iran and Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia being a traditional ally of the United States. So this is unprecedented.
Precisely. I mean, in the 70s, the Saudis provided all of the oil that was necessary for that the U.S. consumed. Today, the U.S. is, I think, the biggest producer of oil, or the second biggest producer of oil in the world, because of the shale oil and so on. And Saudi Arabia is not as important a strategic partner anymore. Now, what happened in the aftermath of the Arab Revolution and the collapse of this Iraqi state was that Iran filled out this vacuum in the Middle East, the military and the political vacuum in the Middle East, And when ISIS arose, the Americans had to make a choice. What are they going to focus on? Fighting ISIS or fighting Iran? The fact is, they couldn't fight. They needed Iran to stabilize Iraq. They needed Iran to even stabilize Syria. I remember back then, the Saudis and the Israelis were saying, "Never mind about ISIS. That's not a big threat. Go for the head of the snake." This is the term they're using again today. Go to attack Iran. But Obama realized they couldn't, because the Iranian military, the Iranian regime, is just too powerful. And that was the basis of trying to make a deal, the nuclear deal with Iran, trying to bring Iran into the fold, penetrate it rather than militarily antagonize it, penetrate Iran by economic means, and then try to control it in that way. The problem was that in that equation, Israel and Saudi Arabia would lose out.
Left out.
And so they went into opposition to Obama. Netanyahu was going around in the US campaigning against Obama, openly supporting Trump against Obama. And essentially that's what led us to this position here, that Netanyahu and the Israeli regime in essence plays such an independent role today, and in opposition in many ways to the Americans, trying to drag them into a conflict that the Americans can't win. But the problem is this.
Although we have to say as well, yeah, Israel plays an independent role, but Israel couldn't play that independent role if it wasn't for military and financial support from the United States.
There's definitely a faction, a wing of the US ruling class, which has this idea, and we talked about this, that we cannot show weakness. We need to show, and weakness as in military weakness, we need to show strength. We need to come down hard against our enemies. We need to come down firmly on the side of anything that our allies do, because otherwise we're going to look weak. The big gangster boss is going to look weak, and everyone is going to come for us.
But at the end of the day, this is a reckless policy that will show their weakness.
Precisely, because here's the point I want to make, is that, you see, until now, the Iranian, the influence of Iran and Iranian strength in the region was not. It was still an abstract notion, as in it's never been tested before. And the forces of Iran and the U.S. and the imperialists and the allies of the Americans had not been tested, except for some skirmishes and a few drone and rocket attacks. But here you actually have a direct clash, which actually completely changed the situation. It's like Schrodinger's cat, It's like before you see it, it doesn't really exist. But now Iran's strength is seen by everyone. It's been proven.
But in fact, the cat was there before.
The cat was there, but no one had seen it. Precisely.
Can I just add that before this latest retaliation, what did the Iranian regime do? They went around to all the Gulf states and Jordan, a very high-level visit to Jordan, first time for many decades, to tell them, look, we are strong. Be careful what you do. If you come out in support of Israel in this retaliation, you'll also suffer the pain for it. And this had an impact, isn't it? Because now they're saying that Israel did not use Jordanian airspace, which would have been the simplest. And Jordan has supported Israel previously, but in this time, Jordan closed its airspace to Israeli attack on Iran because they had been warned.
And they went through Syria with the help of the Americans. Yes, and the point is, you see, Iran is a strong regime, is a nation, you can say, in a way, with a strong state, a strong military, whereas the Gulf states in many ways are still artificial creations of the imperialists, made for specific reasons to extract oil. Basically, they used to be pirates. They used to be pirates, and the British used to rob the British until the Brits paid them off to stop robbing them. And then they found oil and so on. But the point is that there's no national cohesion as such. These regimes don't have strong militaries. They have a lot of gear, but without the American bases on their land, they can't do anything. 40,000 US troops
in the region.
On the other hand, they all have very oppressed Shia minorities, in which Iran has significant influence, and which could turn to become a popular force, which could become a serious threat to the regime as a
Or in
whole.
the case of Jordan, a majority of the population who are Palestinians.
Palestinians who see that Iran is the only country, at least on paper, that's fighting against the Israeli onslaught. But I'll continue here. There's another bit in this article that says, there are already discussion in hawkish Israeli and US defense circles about the prospect of Israel, or even the US, striking Iran's nuclear program in the coming months during the lame duck period after the US presidential election. Many have long argued against trying to strike Iran's hardened underground nuclear facilities, saying that Israel lacked the advanced US-provided airborne refuelers and bunker-busting ordnance penetration to succeed. Now, this I think is completely nuts, because, as I said before, Iran is a huge country. It's like half of Western Europe, more or less, I think, so something like that. It's extremely mountainous, and it's got a very well-entrenched nuclear program, which I'm sure
for good reason,
because it's been attacked before, but also which is dug into underground, into mountains on several tracks. There's no one place that they could. It's not even America. I think there was Foreign Policy had an article a while ago about a war game simulating a potential attack on Iran, which would require hundreds of thousands of US troops, let alone Israelis, to shoot, to keep down the Iranian air defenses, to find and even then, it's highly unlikely that they could qualitatively, significantly damage the nuclear program. They might throw it back a few months, but the fact is that the Iranian nuclear program is there. The capabilities are there. There's a big scientific community in Iran which has been primed to support it. The production facilities are there. The know-how is there, and the production lines are set up. If the Iranians wanted to, probably within a year, or maybe maximum 2, they could make a nuclear bomb. But all this talk, this bombastic talk about going to strike it, if anything, is just giving Iran
a
reason to build a nuclear war.
Of course.
Someone was saying,
I mean, this is a very simple equation, right? Saddam Hussein did not have weapons of mass destruction, and his country was invaded. He was killed.
Gaddafi
gave up his weapons of mass destruction in an agreement with the United States during the so-called war on terror, and his country was bombed, and he was killed. North Korea does have weapons of mass destruction, nuclear weapons, and they can't do anything about it. So there is an incentive.
But the point is this: the the insanity of it all, or the fact that they can't see where this is going, is that what does it mean to push Iran towards a nuclear bomb? I think the Iranian regime has so far refrained from it for calculated reasons. Why? Because if Iran gets a nuclear bomb, Saudi Arabia will immediately get a nuclear bomb. I believe, in fact, that they have a deal with Pakistan, that the Pakistanis would supply them with some of their nuclear bombs if Iran got it. Then, of course, Turkey would want one. Turkey is a big military force, probably in numerical terms, the biggest one in the region. Then Egypt would want to scale up their nuclear program. And then what are you going to have? A small
nuclear race.
It's going to be a nuclear race in a highly volatile and unstable region, which could have devastating effect. And of all of these, Israel would still come out as the weakest, because Israel is a small country. In a nuclear standoff, Israel could be wiped out very, very easily. So in that sense, this is not in the interest even of Israeli capitalism, let alone for the peoples of the region, who are going to pay a heavy price. But I'll just end it on this. This is the final paragraph of this article. It says the strategic message to Iran is that you can't hide behind Hezbollah, Hamas, or the other proxies anymore. You're in it now. One of these guys that they interviewed said, says, a shadow war is one thing, but open war is another thing entirely.
But I'm not sure that's the conclusion the Iranians are going to draw from this small-scale attack.
Not at all. In fact, if anything, they conclude the situation is, what the conclusion they can draw is that everyone can see now that they're far more powerful than they are. And also, in fact, not only can they hide behind Hezbollah and Hamas, but by these actions, the Americans and the Israelis have pushed the whole region behind Iran. There's widespread sympathy amongst layers of the Middle Eastern masses who were not very sympathetic towards Iran before. There's wide-scale sympathy towards Iran at the moment. In fact, I would say this: before this war, the Iranian regime was in a crisis in many ways. In Lebanon, Hezbollah had been de facto in power for almost 10 years.
Become discredited.
Become extremely discredited because they were carrying out the same policies essentially that all of the other Western-backed forces had been doing for decades. In Iraq, is the Iranian-controlled regime, again, which has become extremely discredited. And the Iranian regime itself was being undermined. In fact, I highly doubted that this would be a fact, but the royalist opposition, the Western-backed opposition, was beginning to gain an echo amongst the Iranian masses because the conditions were being undermined as much as it was. But with these provocations and this push towards war by the Americans and the Israelis, they're actually pushing not only the populations of these countries, but of the whole region to have a much more sympathetic view of Iran, and therefore strengthening the position of the Iranian regime.
Can I just say we won't have time to discuss this, but maybe next week. That I think a big factor in what's happened is a lot of speculation about why is it that the Israelis had a let's say scaled down retaliation this time. But I think the one important question that shouldn't be forgotten is that we are 1 week away from the US election. And the last thing that the United States wants is a big shock in the Middle East that brings up the price of oil or anything like this, and has a detrimental effect to Biden-Harris election campaign. But as of next week, as of the end of next week, this factor is over, and we don't know who's going to take over in the United States. Trump has his own ideas about Israel and Iran and all of that, and so even if the situation is now temporarily in terms of a few days contained, then all hell might break loose after this, and the process of escalation towards a regional war can resume much quicker.
Definitely, Netanyahu is not finished. Nothing has been resolved. The contradictions have only been heightened. But as you say, we will get back to this. Obviously, this is one of the most important things in world news. But the last topic, we've talked for a long time, but I think we might talk for a while yet. The last topic we have is U.S. elections. Obviously, we haven't talked about this lately, but in a way, you can say anything we talk about is related to the Americans, because the U.S. is the biggest imperialist power on the planet, and it's involved in all of these conflicts that we talk about. But there was a big kind of a scandal going on in the U.S. In the past week, which is around the Washington Post, because the Washington Post, which has for many years supported the Democrats. In fact, I think last time they had this big campaign about what was it? Something about how important it is to stand up for democracy, and so I'll find it when you talk in a minute. The quote, I forgot it now. But this time they refrained from endorsing a candidate, and this led to them losing 250,000 subscribers in a very short period of time. And there was a series of journalists. One of them was Robert Kaplan, I think he is Victoria Nuland's husband, a very known warmonger, neocon kind of a type of guy. And the whole liberal establishment is just up in arms about the betrayal of the Washington Post and so on. And this forced Jeff Bezos, who is I think he's still the richest man on the planet. If he's not, is in top 3.
One of them. Yeah.
One of them is the owner of Amazon and the owner of Washington Post, to come out and explain himself. And I think this is a good kind of starting thread that we can begin to pull in this conversation, because he starts by saying, the article is called Opinion, the hard truth, Americans don't trust the news media. And it was written on the 28th of October. It says, In the annual public surveys about trust and reputation, journalists and the media have regularly fallen near the very bottom, often just above Congress. But in this year's Gallup poll, we've managed to fall below Congress. Our profession is now
That's some achievement.
that is something we'll get to. I have the Gallup poll here. Actually, we'll discuss that in a minute. But our profession is now the least trusted of all. Something we're doing is clearly not working. Let me give an analogy. Voting machines must meet two requirements. They must count the vote accurately, and people must believe they count the vote accurately. The second requirement is distinct from and just as important as the first.
What is the second one?
Sorry?
What is the second? Oh, the second. Oh, yeah.
So on the one hand,
Yes,
you
yes.
have to have voting machines that work, and then
you
people have to trust that.
believe you.
Now they say that they make good journalism, and we have to believe them. They say they carry out the first bit, but I'm not too sure about that. But I think this is a huge admission. First of all, we have to say Jeff Bezos owns Amazon. He owns what's it called? Blue Horizon, the space agency that has massive billion-dollar contracts with the state.
Blue Sky.
No, it's called Blue Horizon, I think.
Yes.
Blue Origin, sorry. And last time, Trump did not give Amazon a series of contracts. They have tens of billions of dollars of contract, and some of them are up for renewal in the next period. And it's clear that Jeff is afraid that if he goes too hard against Trump, he's going to lose some of these contracts if Trump comes to power. But I think it does say something about the level of trust generally because he's right. People don't trust the American media. We'll get to the figures in a moment, but there's this massive distrust of all of the state institutions of the bourgeois. And Trotsky, I remember one time said, in order for the bourgeois need the press, they need to be able to affect public opinion. But in order to do that, they must say some things that are true. The majority of the time, at least, they have to state true things, true facts, so that the few times where it counts, where they have to pursue their own interests, they can feed you a lie. But the fact that these guys have been lying for so long, not only that, but they've been pushing and pushing and pushing their own line, that they've become they've seen as unreliable, and that goes for the whole system. That the system the people don't trust that, not even that the voting machine works, and they don't trust the people who are telling them the results either.
Yeah. Well, can I just say that, the very fact that Jeff Bezos owns the Washington Post, this tells you something.
Yeah.
People are not going to trust him because there is a conflict of interest, isn't it? If there is a conflict of interest between telling the truth and his business interest, who do you think? Which one do you think he's gonna pursue? And people can realize this. Everyone can realize this.
Yeah, and that's what
the media is supposed to be independent, but in reality is heavily monopolized and controlled. It's not just the newspapers, but also the TV agencies, social media, advertising. It's all heavily concentrated in the hands of a very cinema, film production, everything. It's concentrated in 3 or 4 big monopoly groups that tell us what we should think.
The whole idea of a free press, free to pursue the interests of a tiny clique of capitalists who control them. There's an article moving on in the New York Times. It says, voters are deeply skeptical about the health of American democracy. This is from the 27th of October, and it says, 3/4 of voters in the United States say democracy is under threat, though the perception of the forces imperiling it vary widely based on partisan leanings. And a majority of voters believe that the country is plagued by corruption, with 62% saying that the government is mostly working for the benefits of itself and elites rather than the common good. That's a damning statement. They're not wrong. That's a damning statement, isn't it? Now, here's the point I really wanted to get to with all of this prefacing, is this. It says, the eroding faith in the nearly 250-year-old American system of government follows 4 years of unparalleled challenges, a violent riot in an attempt to overturn the 2020 presidential election, the criminal conviction of former President Donald J. Trump and Mr. Trump's continued insistence that the democratic process is rigged. This, in my opinion, is a great example of doublespeak and everything that people hate about the US media. Because here comes the New York Times, this defender of democracy, defender of, human rights and freedom of press and this and that. And they have this, New Yorker intellectual academic kind of, how to say? Veneer. And in the most disgusting way, they use this as a to attack their opponent and to try to push people, essentially push and force people against Trump, in essence, to following their agenda. Now, we don't defend Donald Trump, but the fact is, this article has got a lot of interesting things in it, a lot of interesting facts and figures, but the majority of it is against Trump. It's all about this the riots and all the things that he does and says, and he doesn't respect democracy, and he doesn't. Whereas while they're doing this, while undermining all of the principles that they claim they're fighting for. This is why people hate these things. In fact, I would say that one of the reasons why Donald Trump has been able to maintain this anti-establishment aura is because he's being attacked by these guys, by the establishment, precisely. He's a man.
I mean, as you said, just to be clear, I mean, we are communists. We think that the two candidates in the U.S. presidential elections, they both capitalist candidates. They represent capitalist parties, and in one way or another, they both represent the interests of the capitalist class. But at the same time, it's clear that Trump is presenting himself as an outsider, as an anti-establishment candidate, and that's what a big section of the ruling class, the liberal ruling class, let's say, they hate him so much for that, because he's undermining the very basis of democracy, of capitalist democracy, that is, and he's exposing capitalist democracy for what it is, which is not democratic at all. And what you said about 60-something% of the population who think that the government rules in the interest of themselves and the rich, this is very dangerous, because as you were saying, Trotsky pointed out one time that in most normal times, the ruling class rules by consent. People accept the system, and accept the system on the basis that the system appears to be at least democratic. You can vote for one government, you can vote for another party, you can participate, you can demonstrate, you can have a meeting and so on. But in reality, nothing changes. The same people rule, the ruling class rules. But if people no longer trust in bourgeois democracy, then that is very dangerous for the ruling class. And Trump is dangerous for them because he's helping undermine the very concept of bourgeois democracy.
They hate him because he pulls away the curtain, so to say. He shows everyone what the machine looks like. They're all like him, but they're more composed. They pretend better. But the point is this: they attack Donald Trump for being not caring about democracy and being a misogynist and a racist, and all perfectly fine. Although, there's some of it which is a lie. But anyway, but in reality, while they're carrying this high kind of ivory tower view, they're the ones undermining democracy. They've used the court systems against him. All of these cases you find against, I'm sure you could have made these cases against Trump for decades, against every one of them. But now that they want him down, they use the court, they bend the law, they use the state apparatus, they use the tax authorities, they use the FBI, they use the police as much as they can. They use the media, they use the press, and they bend this bourgeois democracy, the veneer of it. Even they bend it to an extreme. Hillary Clinton was out saying, anyone who carries out Russian pro-Trump propaganda should go to jail. Right? What does that mean if it's not fear-mongering and an attempt to undermine basic democratic rights?
It's also a bit hypocritical of the U.S. establishment to criticize other countries for interfering in U.S. elections when the U.S. has been for 200 years interfering in everybody else's elections, not only through propaganda, NGOs, foundations, and so on, but also through direct military intervention, sanctions, and all of that.
Yeah,
so.
And just to continue on the hypocritical note is that right now, the Democrats have always collaborated with the Labour Party and all the social democracies actually of Europe, interfering in the U.S. elections and getting advice from there's this recent thing about this. Was it 100 people from Labour Party going but also important strategists, advisors of Keir Starmer to go and explain, help the Harris team figure out how they dealt with the left and how they've dealt with all of these questions. Anyway, let's leave that to a side. But the point is that all of these things they're doing is in fact proving to a layer of Americans, a part of them are middle class, a big part of them are also workers who have had enough of this system, that actually this system, that everything that Trump is saying is true. He's saying the system works for the rich, it works for Wall Street, it works for the politicians. They bend the law, they use it for their own benefit. They're all corrupt. And they're actually proving him right by this hysterical attacks against him and this trying to use any means necessary or possible to attack him. I'll just continue because there's an interesting thing here. It's a long bit I'm going to read out, but it says here, they interview someone who says, I even have to go to a food bank and my husband and I make a decent salary and we still can't wholly make ends meet with 3 children, said Tyra Jackson, 51, a social worker from Norfolk, Virginia. It's just a lot, me having to work and him working overtime just to try to make ends meet. And then it continues a bit further down. It says, a core group, roughly 1/3 of voters, believe that the country's problems are so bad that it's on the verge of failure. A majority of Republicans and 16% of Democrats hold a fatalistic attitude about the future of the nation. The Washington elite control everything and the will of the people has been ignored, said Randall Parr, 72, a retired farmer in Lebanon, Indiana. And it's not just the Democrat or Republican, it's the Washington elite. There's just too much money floating around by lobbyists that are corrupting the Washington, D.C., he added, and is tearing us all apart. Now, this is the situation. You have the establishment, the majority part, the dominant wing of the ruling class, in this desperate war against Trump, trying to attack him and talking about democracy and so-called fighting against oppression, fighting against misogyny, and fighting against racism.
By helping Israel bomb Gaza.
Never mind that. No, we'll get to that, I think, maybe next episode. But meanwhile, a huge part of the American population is under enormous pressures, and they're experiencing declining or stagnant living standards, stagnant on a level. 28% of Americans say that they're just about making ends meet. I mean, that's the 28% of Americans are on the verge of a collapse into deep poverty.
The other day, I was watching a report on the news about they went to Las Vegas, and they were thinking about which way is the state going to go, and they were interviewing people who live in the underground tunnels under the city, and one of them said, I cannot remember now the figure, but it says that there's a percentage of the population who are working, but they are one paycheck away from homelessness.
Yeah.
And this introduces an enormous stress and strain on people and the psychology and so on.
Yeah.
This is the reality of the situation in America today.
Well, last year there was 650,000 people in the US who experienced homelessness. This year it's already 10. The year is not finished, but it's 10% higher than the same time last year. That's the record. You have 100 million people having healthcare debt, and saying that they refrain from getting prescriptions because of that healthcare debt. I mean, you have the opioid crisis, you have the healthcare crisis, you have the general decay of industries.
This is really what undermines bourgeois democracy in the United States, the fact that it's unable to deliver for the majority.
And then you have someone like Trump coming And I think this is a key thing, because Trump appeals to two segments. One is the petty bourgeois, middle class, rabid, fanatic. And he appeals to those because he's hard. He talks radical measures. In fact, a solid revolutionary working class lead would probably gain a huge bulk of this layer even behind it. But he also appeals to the work. For the first time, the Republicans are talking about the working class, and they're proudly saying we are now the party of the working class. No one talked about the working class until Trump started doing it at the last time, at the last election campaign. And a part of the working class thinks, okay, at least someone is listening to us. Someone is hearing. Someone is talking. Then it's obviously mixed up with all sorts of xenophobic and racist and demagogic rhetoric and things. Yes, and Trump can't solve their problems, but for now, they can see. Look at what the elite has done. The Democrats and the government today represents the traditional establishment. Donald Trump is a maverick renegade from his own class, you can say. He plays by his own rules. But they see what all of these guys have done. Decades of wage stagnation, decades of just gradual decline of infrastructure, of wages, of living standards. Everything that was called the American dream, that's all gone. No one believes in it anymore. Everyone has a cynical attitude.
No one believes because it doesn't exist.
It doesn't exist.
I mean, there's now, I think, 2 generations where the children can only expect to live worse than their parents. This is what gives rise to this really pessimistic outlook.
Precisely.
It's not the people in America have gone mad, and that's why some of them support Trump. Is that the system has been revealed to be mad, and then people are really angry about this. And it's not only Trump. Trump is a reflection of this. It's a symptom of the crisis of the system. But there's also tens of millions of people who do not trust either of the main political parties, who are not going to vote for either of them.
Yeah. And I would say, I mean, I have the Gallup poll now that the New York Times was talking about. On Gallup's website, I think you can find it's called Americans' Trust in Media Remains at Trend Low. It's not a very catchy title, but nevertheless. There's lots of very interesting stuff here, but it says in the 1970s, they made 3 polls about how much people trusted the media. And trust in media ranged from 68 to 72%. That was relatively high. In the 1990s and early 2000s, it was between 51 and 55%. So a slight decline, but still the majority. The latest figures put it at a historical low of 36% saying they have no trust at all in the media. Right? Another 33% expressed not very much confidence. That's a massive decline.
That's nearly 70 between the two of them.
That's massive. This is reversal of the, and this is a hollowing out of the system. These guys, they live in a bubble. They don't know what in reality, they're preparing for revolutionary events.
Yes. I saw another opinion poll. I cannot remember the figures now, but it said the amount of people who said that they thought that violence will be needed to sort out the situation. And I think it was like 20% of the population said that violence will be needed. This is a complete collapse of trust in bourgeois democracy.
They say also here, there's the trust gap is also a generational gap. Mm-hmm. So those aged 50, 65 and older, had 43% trust in the media, and those aged under 50 had 26%. Mm-hmm. That's quite significant. That's a and I'm sure
under 50 is a lot of people.
Yeah. I mean, when it comes to Democrats, young Democrats trust the media by 31%. Versus 75% of old Democrats. Old Democrats are basically the ones who trust it. But I mean, there's not many of them left. Most people don't trust any of the parties. Then it talks about this is not just the media; it's the whole system. The legislative branch of the federal government, consisting of the U.S. Senate and House of Representatives, is rated about as poorly as the media, with 34% trusting them. And it goes on. Between 40 and 48% of Americans trust the judicial branch headed by the U.S. Supreme Court. And it goes on and on and on. And I mean, this is a damning indictment of U.S. Of the whole bourgeois democracy in the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
And the primary driver of this force is not Trump, but it's actually the establishment itself. Mm-hmm. That they are trying to manage this crisis that they created. It's created, political instability, there's mass dissatisfaction, and they're trying to cling on to power to direct control as best as they can by using all of these institutions. But the more they use it, the more eroded it will be. Mm-hmm. And it's true that for now, Trump is the one who's gaining from this. But obviously, Trump can't solve the problems of the U.S. workers and youth. And sooner or later, that mood of radicalization which is being prepared will mature and also reflect itself in revolutionary working class movements. Mm-hmm. I think that's the
the U.S. comrades of the Revolutionary Communist International, Revolutionary Communists of America, their slogan for these elections is it Class War 2024.
Yes,
and this is really what's behind all of this. Because it's true. I mean, the liberal establishment is helping clearly undermine the institutions they want to defend by using them so blatantly in their own favor. But behind all of this, at the root of all of this, is the economic crisis, mm-hmm. isn't it? The U.S. economy is still growing, but it's growing on the basis of what? Growing on the basis of creating massive inequality. Inflation is eating up on wages. I think we've used this figure before. There has been no real increase in real wages since the 1970s.
Yeah.
So we talk about
stagnation.
A long period of time where there's been, as we were saying before, the American dream no longer exists. And on the basis of this, American bourgeois democracy and its institutions are being completely undermined. Yeah. And the grounds being prepared for class struggle. Yeah. The only problem is that on the left, there is no one. Bernie Sanders, for a period of time, kind of reflected this, capitalized on this mood when he was talking anti-establishment from the left. And he was the only one who could come up and challenge Trump for this electorate, for this kind of mood of anti-establishment. But then obviously he completely betrayed. He supported Clinton, he supported Democratic establishment. And same for Alejandro Ocasio-Cortez and the so-called squad. And at this time, the Democratic establishment, the Democrats, are so hated, also because of their role in foreign policy. What's the difference for in relation to the people of Gaza and so on? It is very interesting times in the United States.
Yeah. And just to finish off, I think that sums up everything very, very well. In fact, I think we have two articles that I would recommend everyone to read. There's one article on the website of our American comrades, it's communistusa.org. Actually, we are going to reproduce this article tomorrow on Marxist.com. It's called "What is Trumpism?" Written by Bryce Gordon on the 3rd of October. It's an excellent rundown of the phenomenon of Trumpism and what it reflects in an immature class struggle, you can say, or a distorted reflection of a rising class struggle and class dissatisfaction. And another one on Marxist.com, it's called Donald Trump's Populism, What Does It Represent? By Rob Sewell, which we published on the 28th of October. I recommend everyone, we're gonna link this in the chats and in the different places that we post this thing, and I recommend everyone to go and read it. And there actually Bryce writes that he mentions I can't remember who it is, but someone basically says that Trump, when Sanders was coming up, Trump said, I'm going to take some of that rhetoric, some of that anti-establishment rhetoric and use it myself, and he has done so. And we can say what we want about Trump. He's a reactionary. He's an enemy of he's a capitalist. He's an enemy of the working class. However, the way that he dealt with the establishment of the Republican Party and the U.S. establishment, the rest of the ruling class, that is how, as in standing up defiantly and putting on a strong fight, so to say, that is how the Bernie Sanders should have acted. If Bernie Sanders had stood up and said, no, we're not going to take this. We're going to fight against the Democratic Party establishment. We're going to set up our own party on the basis of this and this program of a fight against the billionaire class.
And he had hundreds of thousands behind him.
Millions of people who were looking towards him. And polls showed at the time that, in fact, if anyone could beat Trump, it was Bernie Sanders. And a layer of the working class who was looking for a radical way out, not finding it anywhere else, went behind Trump. And so that shows what is possible in the future and what lies ahead, really. These are all just anticipations of the class struggle coming up in the next period. So what do you say, Jorge? I think we should wrap it up now. I think this is a good place to wrap it up. I want to thank everyone who tuned in, who participated in the chats, and as I said again, please keep sending us feedback, send us articles, suggested topics to discuss. If you have questions that you want answered, we might not be able to answer all of these things. We might not be able to deal with all of it, but we will definitely take it into consideration and try to address it in the next period. Also, if you can, of course, subscribe to our channels and share our material as widely as possible. This was Against the Stream, episode number 4, with Jorge Martin and Hamid Alizadeh. Thank you very much.